Hello, welcome to the ROC Podcast. I'm Joey Comley. I'm a criminal practitioner who's tried over 100 cases as a prosecutor and a defense counsel in both federal and military courts. And I'm currently the Kentucky State Director for Right on Crime. At this podcast today, I'm so very pleased to welcome Kentucky's chairman of the Senate Judiciary Committee, who was first elected in 2012, and as a representative of the citizens of several counties in Western Kentucky. He has additional standing committee assignments that include agriculture, natural resources and energy, veterans, military affairs, public protection, and families and children. In addition to those committees, if I mentioned all the interim joint, statutory, special committees, and caucuses, we'd take the entire 20-minute session that we have allotted today. So forgive me, Senator, but I do want to mention briefly, Senator Westerfield is a lifelong resident of Christian County, a husband and a father to two children, who all four of which attend the New Work Fellowship in Hopkinsville, and is a practicing attorney who runs his own civil practice devoted to serving clients across Western Kentucky. Now, Senator, you're no stranger to reform. As early as your first year, you introduced Senate Bill 200 in the 2014 legislative session. That brought about the largest overhaul of our juvenile justice reform in over 30 years. Obviously, you've had several assignments that are part of the implementation of that bill. And I want to thank you for just joining us today. Thank you for your tireless work in the criminal justice arena. And thank you for just being a thoughtful, dedicated, and creative leader in this space.
I'm glad to be on, Joey. I appreciate it.
Thank you, sir. I want to start off with some of your work on the Juvenile Justice Oversight Committee.
Yeah.
How would you grade Kentucky's work in that space, and why would you give it such a grade?
Well, I think it depends on what year we're talking about. Early on, I'd say our grade was pretty good. I'd say we had an A or an A minus maybe, or a B plus at the worst. For a number of years after the enactment of Senate Bill 200 in 2014, there was a great deal of work and a lot of focus and interest on the implementation of the bill. And it was new, so it's understandable that the agencies were all involved in that. That's state government. I would not give the same good grade to all of the local stakeholders. There are some, particularly in the education space, even to a much lesser degree, the law enforcement and prosecutorial space. There was some reluctance to buy into the philosophy and the shift that Senate Bill 200 called for in juvenile justice. And this is a bill, just for context, only dealt with the offenders on the lowest end of the offense spectrum. So this didn't deal with any violent offending youth. These are all the status offending kids and public offense kids on the lowest level felony that Kentucky has, and those with little or no history. So I think we did really well. As time has gone on and we've gotten more accustomed to the bill and what it requires of all the stakeholders, I think there's been a lot of growth on the part of those stakeholder groups that had some reluctance about it early on. But now the state government side has not quite kept pace with the bill and its initiatives like we should. I've had conversations just this week, Joey, about the first sections of the bill that we enacted a decade ago. It created a grant program to invest dollars into local community-based services for these children, evidence-based programs for these children, to keep them engaged in school, to keep their families engaged and their parents accountable. We have not, under three governors and multiple budgets, both in a split legislature and now with supermajorities that are Republican, at no time have I successfully gotten money funneled into that grant program. I would give us a D plus maybe, or a C at best, for our failure to fund that. Because now we're hearing complaints at different places, and we've seen numbers across the state with reduced attendance rates. And I can't help but wonder how much of a difference we could have made in the lives of the very children we're talking about and the kinds of children we're talking about if we had been investing over the last 10 or 11 years in those children and those communities where the need is, instead of not investing in it and now reaping the consequences of that failure. So those are the grades I'd give and the reasons why. There's obviously still an opportunity for us to do that. And as we're coming into a budget year, it's my hope that we do.
So apart from budgeting allocations directed at programmatic solutions, is there any need for further legislation on implementing specific provisions of Senate Bill 200, or is it's purely a funding and an agency-driven process at this point?
I think it's chiefly a funding and agency-driven effort at this point. That's not to say that there aren't some calls for amendments here and there or small adjustments. I'd like to see additional opportunities be given to juveniles that mess up. Here's a quote, and I've shared this every time I talk about juvenile justice, Joey, and I firmly believe in it. It's a Frederick Douglass quote. It's easier to build strong children than to repair broken men. If we can invest in juveniles, in the children of Kentucky, and the children of pick the state that you're in, if you can invest in their lives when they're still young, when they're still learning, and they're gonna mess up and make mistakes just like you did, just like I did. But if we can change the trajectory of their lives meaningfully, then we save and make orders of magnitude of difference for the lives of that child, their family, their smaller local community, their greater community, and the Commonwealth. And that's true in any state. It's my hope that we can treat children like children. There's still some policy initiatives that I'd love to see, like a minimum age of criminal responsibility, juvenile competency. I'd love for us, I tried with Senate Bill 200 and failed. It was a compromise effort. I would love for us to prohibit outright the detention of status offending youth. And for those that aren't aware, a status offense is a crime that's only a crime in the sense that a kid does it. If it was conduct that an adult did, it wouldn't be a crime at all. But because they're a child, we've deemed certain conduct disfavored, and we call that a status offense. And the biggest one, far and away, it's not even close, is truancy. And that is a problem. That's a behavior that needs to be addressed. But if you only ever create a system that punishes that conduct, then you don't ever get to the rationale, the reason behind the truancy. If you don't ever investigate why the family isn't doing what it's supposed to be doing, or holding that child accountable, or helping raise that child correctly, then you're missing the boat. And you're doing it at a much more expensive clip, because detention in every state costs substantially more than the sort of local community-based interventions that exist and that are far more effective.
And then, of course, in line with what you're saying, this is a generational problem, because if we don't reach those children, they don't become better men. And then those
you
are
and
the
I
same
have
men
both
that
seen them.
are raising children.
You and I in court, in these dockets that you and I have had at different times as prosecutors and as defense attorney in your case as well, we've seen, I won't speak for you. I have seen a generation of children who were the children of the generation before that were in court. If you don't make differences and break that cycle of criminal conduct and interaction with the system, you're not helping your state grow and be better. You're not helping that human being that's in your community be better, contribute to the world meaningfully, instead of keeping a spot warm inside the local county jail.
Now, we've seen some wonderful work along these lines by nonprofits and other folks that just are doing good and aimed at uplifting the community and its youth. One that testified recently was Kentucky Lions. They talked about a program called Lion's Quest before your committee. And obviously that program is directed at kind of reforming a troubled youth's individual way of thinking, but also kind of reformatting their social interaction and kind of giving them hope at an early stage when we're developing them. Are you aware of any other programs within a state that you think should be replicated to get after
I appreciate you asking about the Lions Quest. I think it's a great program, and the Lions Club there in Madisonville, that's Hopkins County, Kentucky. I don't represent Hopkins County, but it's nearby, and they I think are sort of a model for Lions Club International to use. I don't know that it's being rolled out anywhere else. I think LaRue County, Kentucky is looking at or using some of that curriculum, but I don't know that they've got a fully fledged program. But the best part of that, it does exactly what we've just now been talking about. You're investing in the life of each individual child. You're not treating them as just the next case on the docket. You're not just responding or reacting to bad conduct with a consequence. The program is intended to redirect, to change, and to teach meaningfully, not just to punish, but to help teach that child and improve that child in a meaningful and lasting way. And my favorite part of the program, apart from the approach to juveniles that it takes in the first place, to kids, is that it's a multidisciplinary team effort. One of the favorite parts of Senate Bill 200 was the FAIR team, Family Accountability, Intervention, and Response team. And it's a multidisciplinary team modeled after drug court programs that we have here in Kentucky and that states have around the country. That multidisciplinary team, all of the people who want to help that person in drug court, and in this case, all the people who want to help that kid that is struggling with whatever that criminal case is or status offense case is, they all talk. They talk about little Joey or little Whitney. What's working for him? What's not working for him? How can we better respond to the conduct here? Is mom and dad in the picture? Are they doing what they need to be doing? Or are there other issues? Do we need to get them plugged into a service or a program here? First steps for a little kid, or the Boys and Girls Club for a elementary kid, or a middle school or a high schooler, where you can get mentoring. And I'll say, just for context, the Boys and Girls Club in Hopkinsville, it costs about $350 per kid per year to provide those services. The detention facility in Kentucky a decade ago, it cost over $100,000 per bed per year to detain a juvenile out of home. In Hawaii, it was approaching $200,000, and that was a decade ago. It was 100 and something ridiculous. And again, that was 10 years ago. That cost has only gone up. And then again, you're not doing anything to respond to the conduct. You're just punishing it. We deserve to do better for our children than we do for the adults, even in the system. And in many cases, at least in Kentucky, we saw that we were treating juveniles even worse. Those sorts of programs and interventions are great. There's a story I want to share quickly, and it's because of the FAIR team. And it's not an established program or something that we can fund directly, but it shows you the power and the impact of investing in each individual life based on the circumstances that kid presents with. There was a kid in Southeast Kentucky, this has been several years ago, and he was missing school, and no one could understand why. He was going to be prosecuted for it. He would end up going every day. He'd skip school and then go hang out at this mechanic shop. These two brothers, I think, owned a mechanic shop. All they ever wanted to do is work on motors. And the long story short, they talked to the mechanic owners. And they said, if you'll work with this kid, if we can get him in school, will you all work with him and encourage him to stay in school and then work with him in the afternoons? And that's exactly what happened. And so now that kid's in the classroom and still spending time doing what he loves to do, being mentored by people who appreciate the value of him being in the classroom. There's a way to respond to juvenile misconduct and crime and status offenses that doesn't involve and isn't as expensive and as harmful as detaining them. And any program that does that is worth investing in.
Thanks, Senator. And you get 100% agreement out of me on that one for sure. Transitioning to the current legislative cycle, or the one that starts here in a number of days. I know we've got the day countdown on Twitter, I think. Recognizing that I think everyone across the state agrees something has to be done to kind of help out what's going on in our metropolitan areas within the state. Everyone knows that Kentucky is connected to really those major cities within the Commonwealth. So if there's an increase in crime there, it's felt all across the state. What are some of your thoughts on the House's solution to this problem set in the form of the Safer Kentucky Act? And I realize that I haven't seen any public release of the bill. I know that
makes two of us, Joey. My thoughts are that I appreciate the spirit and the intent. I don't question the good intentions of the sponsor or the folks behind it. But I've had a conversation with Representative Bowman. My concern is that we do what data shows works. Too often, legislators in Kentucky and every other state, legislate based on a knee-jerk reaction to edge case situations. The worst possible outcome happens in a pretrial release case, and everyone ignores the 98% of the times pretrial release decisions work just fine, and we legislate to the 1 or 2%. There are instances where you can see crime has gone up. I don't think you can say that's true across every place in the Commonwealth, or about every single offense category. My concern, and I've shared this with him, I want to see what the bill does, and if it's narrowly targeted and the data backs up whatever it's got in it, then fine. That's worth considering. But if it's a knee-jerk thing, if we're just reacting to instances of crime without regard to the data, without regard to the outcomes that we want to see, but if we're just going to punish more severely, or we're going to come up with harsher penalties because we think that's a deterrent when it's not. Criminals aren't thinking about that before they commit crimes. At least none of the ones I ever prosecuted ever thought about that. If we're not responding meaningfully, then it's just for show. It makes for a great press release, makes for a good campaign stump speech and a direct mail piece. But it could be, if it's not carefully done and rightly done and driven by the data that we have, it's a little more than that. And that would be a shame. So I'm eager to see it. We're talking here on December the 7th. It's on the agenda for next Friday, December 15th, Judiciary Committee meeting. I was promised to see the bill about a month and a half ago and still haven't seen it. So I'm not sure what to make of that. So we'll find out what's in it, I guess, as soon as I see it.
Well, it continues to hide from us both, Senator. I've certainly put feelers out, and I'm doing my best to get after it.
I don't know how else to ask for it than to go right to the bill sponsor and make a request.
But we have seen summaries of its provisions. If you were to take a hack at three of them that you see as potentially, I won't even say troublesome, I'll just say concerning, what would be the three provisions that you find the greatest concern with?
So again, increasing prison stays or increasing penalties, and I'm not going to say no to any of it until I see the bill. The wiretapping gives me a lot of concern, though I've seen some counter coverage of that describing why Kentucky is an outlier in that regard. But again, it's got to be done right, and I need to see the language. I'm trying to think of what the other bullet points are.
For example, like you talked about offenses that are unique to juveniles. I think there's a provision in there to essentially criminalize the truancy of parents from juvenile proceedings.
Yeah, I would object strongly to that. I think, and we just passed a bill in 2023, House Bill 3, that included some language in there that can hold parents more accountable. I think that's sufficient. I think we've done that. And in fact, we've already got a charge on the books, a felony on the books. It's unlawful transaction with a minor in the third degree that already permits the prosecution of a parent for failing to do what they're supposed to be doing as a parent under certain circumstances. So I'm very skeptical of anything that further creates opportunities for juveniles to be held in detention facilities. Because here's the bottom line. Again, everyone loves it. Everyone thinks it feels good, and you get the immediate sense of security and safety that you've done something to make your community safer. But what you've also done is make that kid many more times more likely to reoffend. And you've taken them away from any positive influence you could hope to give them, like a parent or a next door neighbor or aunt, uncle, family member, even a law enforcement or a school resource officer, school administrator. You've taken them away from any positive influence, and you've put them in a facility with the absolute worst influences that you can give them. And forget for a minute how much it's more expensive for the taxpayer, though that's certainly an issue for some legislators. But you're making them better criminals, and the long-term cost of that it's foolish for us to do it that way.
And further eroding the safety of the home as a place that they can come back to when you're criminalizing.
No question. And when you're talking about penalizing moms and dads or whoever the guardian is or the parent in the household, it's a delicate balance. I want to hold those parents accountable too. But if you lock them up, what are you going to do to the other kids in that household? What are you going to do to the bills that they've got to pay for and the expenses of living that they've got to pay for when they're in the county jail for a weekend or for a week? Do they lose their jobs as a result of it? I realize everybody wants there to be a consequence, and that's understandable. But we can't just lock everybody up. That can't be the solution to every single problem that we see.
Senator Westerfield, I wish we had more time. We don't. I'm going to call this block 1 because I'm going to invite you back to do this again
All right.
another time. I appreciate you coming here today. I truly appreciate your time and your candor and really your comprehensive understanding of the environment that's affected from the community all the way into corrections. And your work in this space is something that we're definitely going to miss, and I can't wait to see who takes up the fight in the Senate. I do have to say that, for all of our viewers today, please come back, tune in. There'll be more of this. But to find out more about these issues and more conservative solutions from across the nation, please visit our website at rightoncrime.com. Thanks again, Senator Westerfield.
Thank you all. I'm thankful for Right on Crime and your approach to criminal justice policy, not just in Kentucky, but around the country. You're making a difference. And you're helping old prosecutors like me see the value of doing things based on data and not what feels good, but what actually works the best to make our community safer. So well done.